Good morning and welcome to Scotland Speaks at our usual time of 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning here in Glasgow. But I do hope, if you're an independent supporter, that you are marching for independence in the All Under One Banner March today in Stirling, heading towards Bannockburn. So if you're watching the show, great, but as soon as it finishes, you need to head on over to the march. Now, in last week's show, we featured our excellent by-election candidate, Steve Chisholm, who was fighting the Cromarty Firth by-election. Let's hear some of what he had to say last week.
And when we talk about the energy transition, this just transition, there needs to be a gentle tilting of the seesaw away from oil and gas and gently towards renewables. You know, we've seen some renewables projects challenged with supply chain costs and other things being deferred, being postponed, being pushed out to the right. And as the scale of those opportunities perhaps spread out over a longer period, it's even more important that we retain the skills that are there today, the skills within individual craftsmen and women, and the skills within the supply chain companies that are there for us, that want to service oil and gas and want to see gradual opportunities being made available to them within the supply chain for renewables. So there has to be that smooth transition from one to the other. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine, so there's some forms of energy that are not going to give us 100% of what we need. And it would be crazy to shut down our oil and gas industry only to find ourselves dependent on expensive foreign imports of gas and hydrocarbon products coming in from overseas. We've got them on our own doorstep, we can develop them with our own people and our own skills, and that's what we should do.
And here's what you had to say about Steve's interview. Kizzy says, what a fantastic candidate. Yes, he is. I hope Scots see more of Steve. Just come back from a week in beautiful Gourock. Calmac ferries running frequently around the area. Great service and helped by the most friendly staff. Past Ferguson shipyards and lamented to my son how underused they are. Shipbuilding is certainly something Scotland is good at. Give Ferguson's a chance to build more. Good luck to Steve. I wish him success, and that means success for Scotland. Great show as always. Thank you. Well, thank you, Kizzy Wiz. Geronimo says, great show as always. Good luck at the elections. Sky Echo says, excellent candidate. Jim Fennessy says, great show as always. Louise Hogg says, good practical ideas from Steve to provide jobs and improve public services. And finally, Roger Martin says, and right at the end, an explanation why voting 1 and 2 for a party is a mistake. Love it. And of course, Roger is referring to the List Vote Alba video, which demonstrates how we best utilise the elections in 2026 to maximise the vote for independence. Now, of course, Alba's position is that that election should be the independence election. That's what we should call it. The list vote should be the vote for independence, the mandate that the Supreme Court said we needed to declare independence and negotiate with Whitehall, and that's what we need to do. Let's take a look at that video, which will tell you why you need to vote List Vote Alba next year.
Here's how the Scottish elections work in 2 minutes. Scotland is split up into 8 regions. Each region has around 9 local constituency MSPs that you vote for using your lilac-coloured ballot paper. This vote is simple. The candidate with the highest vote in each constituency wins the seat. Each region then has to elect another 7 MSPs on what's called the regional list. These 7 are elected using your peach-coloured ballot paper. Here you vote for one party. Each party's votes are counted up, and then they are divided by the number of seats that party has already won, plus 1. For example, in 2021, the SNP won 9 constituency seats in the North East. The 148,000 votes they got on the regional list were divided by 10, giving them just under 15,000 votes. The other 133,000 votes were wasted. This meant the SNP did not win a single seat on the regional list in the North East of Scotland. Despite getting the most votes in every region, the SNP only won 2 of 56 regional list seats up for grabs, with unionist parties picking up 46 of them. If, however, SNP voters had decided to back Alba on the regional list instead, the 46 seats won by unionist parties would have been cut to 24. The SNP would have sacrificed just 2 single seats, and in return, the second largest party would have been the pro-independence Alba Party with 30 seats. It would have been an independence supermajority in the Scottish Parliament. In 2026, don't waste your vote. Vote Alba on the regional list.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and please do share it far and wide so that everybody understands how we maximise the independence vote at next year's election. Must be the independence election. The time is now for independence. Now, coming up in next week's show, I'm delighted to announce we'll be hearing from Jim Sillars and his ideas of how we ensure a nationalist victory in next year's elections. So I'll see you all after the break when we're going to be interviewing this week's guest, the Alba Party's new women's convener, Debbie Ewen. Stay tuned. I'll see you shortly. Welcome back to Scotland Speaks, where I'm delighted to be joined by the Alba Party's new women's convener, Debbie Ewen. Debbie, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you on. Now, this is your first time, I think, on the show, so we'll ease into this interview nice and gently by starting off by discussing women and politics. What brought you in to the world of politics?
So I suppose I've always been interested in politics, but for a long time I was a civil servant. I was a policy civil servant. So although I was on the periphery, if you like, of politics, I couldn't actually get too involved. I couldn't ever think about running for election or whatever, because I would have been jeopardising my job. And then latterly in my career, I moved into human resources. And again, I had a fairly high profile job for a large asset management company. And I was prohibited from taking on a political role. But that interest in politics also, was always still there in the background. And when I knew I was coming up to take early retirement, I joined my local LACU, and I decided that if you can't beat them, join them. So I stood as a candidate in 2022, shortly after retiring.
So was the Alba Party your first political party you were able to join?
I had been in a political party way back. I was in the Labour Party and then the ill-fated SDP back in the 80s. But after I joined the civil service in the 80s, then, any political campaigning just came to a halt.
And interested in the civil service, how did things change in the civil service? That spanned quite a career. Have you seen a change in how that's operated?
So I think certainly the departments that I worked in, there was a huge change. I actually joined the Department of Energy at the time of the Piper Alpha inquiry, just after Piper Alpha, and it was a very small department. Safety was not really a huge priority in the North Sea at that time, and obviously things changed massively in the light of the Cullen report. And I ended up moving into the Health and Safety Executive. Health and Safety Offshore was moved into the Health and Safety Executive, and we went from a tiny department to a huge part of the organisation with various different strands within that organisation, policy and press and all of that that comes along with a large government department. So yes, I mean it was massive in the way it changed, and driven by the industry in the North Sea, really.
And in that industry, it's very interesting. How was it as a woman working in that industry? Were you the lone person around the table?
I think The lower grades, there were lots of women. Once you start sort of climbing that greasy ladder, you definitely are the only women. I mean, you know, we used to go into meetings and it would all be men and everyone looked to me to pour the tea. I soon got out of that and made sure that they didn't ask that again.
Goodness, Debbie, what year are we talking about? Of course, that still unfortunately does exist today.
Yes.
But when are we talking about?
We're talking about the 90s. We're talking about the 90s.
So look to you to
Oh, yes, because it was very, very rare for a woman to be in a fairly senior position and be party to those meetings. It was normally all, you know, men.
And tell me, because it's really interesting, how did you, Debbie, change that perception of you in that environment?
I think just by making sure that I was absolutely the ultimate professional, making sure that, you know, I had all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. I think when you are a woman that's in a career where you're mainly men, you can't afford to be the one who's slapdash. You can't afford to be the one who doesn't have all the answers at their fingertips. Because if you are, then, you know, well, that's a woman, you know, she's there, she's a token woman, she's not there on merit. And so you have to make sure you work twice as hard as the men just to get, to achieve the same result, basically.
And of course, I mean, it's just, when you hear it said back at you, just realise how real it is. Has that changed? Is your experience of the workplace, has that changed in the period from, you know, when you started in the 90s through to when you then retired in 2022, where women feel that we have to do so much better than the men to show that we've earned our place?
I think it has changed, but I do, and I think there are, you know, organisations that I worked in latterly, I think were very good at making sure that, you know, that women's voices were heard, that women were accommodated. However, in that industry, in the asset management industry, there's a lot of women who go off to have children. They're given, you know, fantastic maternity benefits, but they still find it very, very difficult to fit back into that corporate world after they come back from maternity leave. And it's the biggest concern for industries like that they're losing talent because that talent can't work the hours that are demanded, can't be as flexible as the industry demands. And so there are still problems for women, maybe not quite the same problems as there were, but there are definitely still problems. I think though sometimes women are their worst enemies. You know, having worked in HR for years and having advertised for applicants, what you would find is that the female applicants in the main would have every criteria that you were asking for, plus a few extra, whereas men would have maybe half the criteria you were looking for, but they would just stick their CV in anyway and just get, you know, give it a punt. I think men are much better at being confident about their abilities, even if they haven't got the qualifications.
And why do you think we do that? Because it's a thing I often say to women who I encourage into politics, that we set such a high entry bar for ourselves, that we bring every possible impediment we can to say, oh no, I couldn't possibly. And why do you think we do that?
I think it's probably been, you know, way back, it's been education. And then it's a very difficult cycle to break. You know, if that's the way that your mother was taught, then that's the way you were taught, then you have to be very, very careful not to pass that on to your own children, because otherwise, I'm not saying you're being educated in school like that these days, but there definitely is a kind of cultural thing of, you know, women thinking that they have to be so much better than the men doing the equivalent job. And it's just something I think that we need to break. But also we need to let women have more experience. Particularly, I find it's quite helpful if women can experience some of the things that they'll be doing in a political setting or in a work setting in a safe environment, in an environment with other women rather than a mixed environment. You will see a totally different side to women when they're in a female-only environment, when they're saying something that's new to them or is different and they're not confident about it.
And we are going to come on to the importance of single-sex spaces, which you've articulated in the workplace, how important that can be from a training perspective. In your HR role, of course, you'll have had a first-hand insight into how difficult it is when women have to leave the workplace, which we do, to have our children and then come back in. I know at conferences you've made us very aware about workplace scenarios in some of the policies you've sought to bring into the party. Is there anything in particular we think employers can be doing to make that time easier for women and indeed parents now in terms of parental leave?
I think definitely looking at flexible working policies is something that employers can be doing. It's sometimes people coming back after a whole year out of the workplace and then suddenly being plunged into, full-time working, trying to sort out new arrangements for childcare, etc., can be really, really daunting. And very often things go wrong and the woman finds that she's taking all the pressure on herself. So employers being flexible, employers being patient, employers allowing, people to come back into roles which maybe don't allow them travelling as much, don't rely on them travelling as much as they were, or allowing a kind of hard stop at a certain time at night because of childcare arrangements, etc. All of those things can help, and can help women just to find their feet a bit until they're back in the swing of things. That doesn't normally take that long.
And it's hugely important because when women do well, society does well, and that's why we have to ensure that there's maximum support for women in the workplace and beyond. Now, you mentioned you worked in the energy sector, and I'm just wondering, when you first came across our dear Alex Salmond, was it during that time in the civil service?
Yes, it was. It was in the early 90s when he came along to the opening of the Health and Safety Executive Offices in Aberdeen. And I was introduced to him by the oil chaplain, Angus Smith. And he gave me a bit of a hard time, actually. He asked me a lot of very, very difficult questions.
How uncharacteristic. So he was an MP then? So was it,
he was the MP for Banff-and-Buchan at the time.
Right.
Yes. And all of the MPs from the local area were all invited. Most of them were just there to, shake hands and smile and, but Alex being Alex wanted to know the nitty-gritty. He wanted to ask the difficult questions. And so, when I thought I was going to have an easy time of it, I actually had quite a grilling from him. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, he was so different from the other MPs that I had met. And I thought, wow, I need to make sure that the next time I meet him, I am well prepared. And I did meet him several times after that. He also was a keynote speaker at a conference I arranged for the 10th anniversary of the Piper Alpha incident. And he was very, very gracious and, stole the show as always.
And so very much about detail and wanting to understand what was going on from you, to obviously to help inform decisions that he would be making. So characteristic of Alex. And we do like to talk about him in every show that we do. The show is so much in his memory as Scotland Speaks. And he, of course, campaigned with you, Debbie, and there's some lovely photos that we'll show whilst we're speaking. How did you enjoy the campaigning Alex Salmond on the same team?
It was great. It was a completely different side of him that I'd obviously never seen when I dealt with him as a civil servant. And the one thing I'd say about Alex is that, he was a real people watcher. So he knew the best way to approach people. He really was interested in what people were saying, what people were doing. It made it infuriating if you're trying to get from one side of a room to another, though, because it would take you an hour, to get from one side of a very, very small village hall to the other. And he would come out of there with bags full of goods, no money probably left in his wallet, and everybody having had their photograph taken with him. It was absolutely fantastic. And it was great. It really showed me how, just taking that bit of effort and time with people can actually pay off in dividends when you're out campaigning.
And he had that in space. I know Debbie thought the world of you. Even thinking about the general election campaign in 2024. Well, actually, we had some very bad weather when we tried to come and campaign with you. But then there was a lovely picture that we had on the banister. We were all lined up, and again, it was just local people. We went into the local pub, and people just coming up and just enjoying his conversation.
Yes, and on that occasion, I do remember that Alec was in the middle of filming a TikTok. And then he stopped to speak to the local minister, and he took the minister's details, and he promised to send him a book of fairy tales. which I'm sure he did.
He did. He always got round to doing all the things that he promised to do, and he thoroughly enjoyed that. Well, we're going to continue our discussion after the break, where I'm going to be speaking to Debbie about women and independence and women in both orders. See you shortly.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ionizer restructures and alkalizes water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
Welcome back to Scotland Speaks, where I am absolutely delighted and privileged to be joined by the Alba Party's Women's Convener, Debbie Ewen. We've been discussing politics, her role in her career, and also as a candidate. But now we're going to move on to her current role, which is as Women's Convener for the party. Now, Debbie, I know you thought long and hard about what you want to do in this role and the importance of this role in the prism, as we spoke of earlier in the show, about women, single-sex spaces, and the importance of creating safe and comfortable atmospheres for women to do their very best and be their best in a comfortable environment. Tell me a bit more about how you might use, how important the single-sex space is, and how you intend to use it to advance women in the party.
So I think single-sex space is non-negotiable really, and it should always be, a top priority for the Alba Party. I think there is a tendency to think that since the Supreme Court decision that that this problem has resolved itself or gone away, and that is certainly not the case. And we must continue, as I've seen, some women's groups are doing. We must continue to hold the Scottish Government's feet to the fire over this. They must make sure that they are writing and applying guidance to make sure that all single-sex spaces are truly single-sex spaces and that women are safe wherever they are, whether that's a hospital, a public convenience or a prison, any of these spaces. Women should have that assurance that they are in a single-sex space and that they are safe and secure.
And protected by law.
Protected by law.
Which is fundamental, because we've been living through a period of time when people are denying the reality, first of all, of biology, and second of all, of what the law actually says in terms of the Equality Act. So we're really only demanding that the law be observed as it was intended to be.
And I think the law is very clear, and the ruling by the Supreme Court, very, very clear. However, people are still muddying the waters by saying, oh, well, it's not quite clear and we need the guidance and we need this and we need that. It is very clear, crystal clear. And, ignorance is no excuse to break the law. As far as I'm concerned, there is no excuses. We know what the law is. That's been clarified 100%. And you can't keep muddying the waters like this. You must.
Now, you spoke about single-sex spaces. They're often seen in a context where women are in difficult situations, these personal domestic situations, but it also applies, as you'd mentioned earlier, to workplace scenarios where it's important for women to be their best, sometimes to receive training in a single-sex environment. Tell me a bit about how you think that works in a workplace environment and how that can then be translated from a political perspective.
So if I give you an example of something like public speaking, for instance, one of the barriers that I found in human resources in getting women into roles where there was a public-facing element and there was a role for public speaking within it, was that they were scared of making a fool of themselves in front of lots of men who maybe were more confident, whether they should be or not, they were more confident.
And worried less about making a fool of themselves.
Worried less about making a fool of themselves and more willing to laugh at themselves. Unfortunately, sometimes women are more concerned about that and don't actually want people laughing and joking. They take it too personally. And so running training sessions where women could, practice on one another and, and build their skills and get feedback from their peers is actually much, much more, reasonable way for women to develop those skills so they're then confident going in and applying for jobs. The same type of thing applies completely in politics. It always frustrates me when there's probably 3 or 4 times the number of men get up and stand and speak at conference than there is women. There'll be one woman and then that will be followed by about 6 or 7 men. And then there'll be another couple of women and then another 6 or 7 men. And so that's a problem because women will not just get up and speak off the cuff. They want to have a certainty that they're going to do a good job. Mm-hmm. And so giving them the chance to practice that by running workshops, etc., and allowing them to practice in a scenario where they feel safe, no one's going to laugh at them, they're not going to make a fool of themselves, will encourage, I feel, more women to come forward. It may be at conference, it may be talking to people on doors, it may be, speaking up on a committee or something like that. But it will give them more, more confidence of being able to speak when they're asked to.
I was women's convener in the SNP for about 7 years, and I held the very first women's conferences, women's training sessions, all women canvassing sessions. And actually, when I left the party, when Alex to join Alba, the people who followed me didn't continue in that vein. And it's sad because it really worked. A lot of women came forward in the all-women environment. They were confident at conferences to speak and not be embarrassed about that or embarrassed about being judged. They were confident then to do canvassing sessions. And it was a really positive experience. And many of them have ended up in Parliament. I'm sure you're planning to do the same thing for women in Alba.
So we have a very small gathering happening on Sunday, which is women only, various different tasks and scenarios. The candidates that will be there will be women, but also the assessors and the people leading the sessions, including myself, will be there. Everyone will be female. And that will just give people a bit of a flavour. It will also allow us to see what works and what doesn't work, what we perhaps need to tailor if we're going to do larger sessions in the future. And what I would like to do is hopefully have some sort of breakout session at a future conference where women who may not have signed up in advance but can come along and drop in, see what we're doing, and hopefully get caught up in the enthusiasm of it all.
And speaking about enthusiasm, we need to have it for the election next year. We need to have women coming forward. We need to have women voting for independence. How do we do it, Debbie? Because the appetite is there. The polls are telling us that the appetite is there, but it's finding the mechanism and finding a party or a group of parties who are prepared to work together to deliver the mechanism to allow people to vote in that manner.
So I think What we need is a positive campaign. We need to always be emphasising the positives. Wherever possible, we need to be getting out on the doors and explaining to people how the Max, the Yes, the List Vote Alba works. Everyone I've spoken to, and I've been out over the last few weeks, every week, knocking at doors. And what I've found overwhelmingly is the independence supporters, they are independent supporters, but they don't really understand how the electoral system for Holyrood works. And so they're at risk of wasting their second votes because they don't really understand how the system works. They don't have anything particular against Alba, but they just do not understand the consequences of voting SNP on both the papers. And so taking that time to make people understand, I think is going to pay dividends. I think we've got some fantastic graphics that are now on leaflets, and we're sending those around. But I also think having a conversation on the door, making people, understand, even just explaining to them the colour of both papers and what one means and what the other one means. I think, we've definitely seen a good understanding with the people that we've spoken to. Unfortunately, we need more people to be coming out. We need more women to be coming out, specifically talking to women about the advantages of getting an independent supporting party or parties into government. And I think we also need to then tie that back to individuals' lives. How will your life be better under an independent Scotland with an independent supporting governing body? We need to tie it back to individual things. Sometimes, people think issues like Grangemouth, etc., they don't really understand how that impacts on them unless they are in that area and it impacts their job. But tying it back to the specifics, your fuel bills will be more affordable. You won't be paying these ridiculous standing charges. Monies that are coming into the country can be used for the benefit of people like you in regards to social housing, free school meals, things like that. That's how we need to tie it back to those things that actually impact people's daily lives.
Now, you knock doors, I know you do, so it's important to listen to what you say, Debbie, because as I do, engaging with people is very important, understanding what's going on behind closed doors is very important. And also it's quite enlightening that people are very receptive to having discussions, because it's like, do you get the sense that they feel like nobody's bothered about them, nobody's bothered to even find out what they're thinking, and yes, so they're scunnered and many of them don't come out and vote? Do you get that feeling as well?
I do, and very often when I go to people's doors, the first thing they'll say to me is, well, thank you for coming round, because nobody else comes to my door. And you do get that feeling that parties are reaching out to them remotely sometimes, or maybe spending a lot of money to reach out to them through social media. But nobody's actually coming to their door and asking what they think and asking why they're not voting. For those, we've seen some dire by-election turnouts. Nobody's asking why are you not voting? Why are you not bothering? You're an independent supporter. Why are you not feeling enthused to vote? And so I think it's really important that we go out and have those conversations, even if other parties are not doing it.
So there's a number of things we can take from what you're telling us, Debbie, is that we have to be engaging with the public more, who are wanting to vote for independence but need the opportunity to do so. And in that discussion, we need to be detailing to them why independence is going to make life better for them. I think though somewhere along the way, those that have been entrusted with making those arguments have lost their way, need to refine that direction. An offer which we have made, as you know, Kenny McCaskill has written to John Swinney to say, we and the other independent supporting parties, we need to be having a discussion about what we do in this election. How important, Debbie, therefore, do you think it is that this election is seen to be something special, something different, something that's going to make a difference to encourage people to come out? By that I mean, how important is it that all independent supporting parties, if they truly believe in independence, state that they're going to treat this election, the list vote particularly, as the independence election?
I think it's huge. I think it's huge. I don't think it's a sustainable position to say we'll put independence on the back burner for any longer. This 2026 election has got to be the catalyst for change, and the change has got to be independence. Otherwise, by the time any further elections come, you know, the country is going to be a shell of what it is today. We already have seen how they're dismantling the country and stealing resources.
Well, it's been a week of closures and bad news actually for business moving south indeed.
So it has to be the catalyst. 2026, we can't wait any longer. We need to do something now. We need to stop the rot and start moving in a more positive direction.
So two things, it must be an independence election. We need the other independent supporting parties, or those who purport to be so, to agree that that second vote, if it's 50 plus 1, 50% plus 1, that is a vote for independence. We begin the negotiations immediately. And secondly, to use their second vote wisely. Debbie Ewen, thank you very much for joining me on Scotland Speaks. Now, coming up in next week's show, as I said, we'll be hearing from Jim Sillars, who characteristically will have an awful lot to say about the elections next year and how we secure the independence mandate we need. He's fast running out of patience, so we'll be keen to hear what he has to say and hopefully deliver on some of the direction he's going to give us. But for this week's show, we're going to end with the instruction that Debbie's given us, which is to vote wisely in 2026 as we watch again the List Vote Alba video. Watch it and share it. From me, until next week, bye for now.
Here's how the Scottish elections work in 2 minutes. Scotland is split up into 8 regions. Each region has around 9 local constituency MSPs that you vote for using your lilac-coloured ballot paper. This vote is simple. The candidate with the highest vote in each constituency wins the seat. Each region then has to elect another 7 MSPs on what's called the regional list. These 7 are elected using your peach-coloured ballot paper. Here you vote for one party. Each party's votes are counted up and then they are divided by the number of seats that party has already won, plus 1. For example, in 2021, the SNP won 9 constituency seats in the North East. The 148,000 votes they got on the regional list were divided by 10, giving them just under 15,000 votes. The other 133,000 votes were wasted. This meant the SNP did not win a single seat on the regional list in the northeast of Scotland. Despite getting the most votes in every region, the SNP only won 2 of 56 regional list seats up for grabs, with unionist parties picking up 46 of them. If, however, SNP voters had decided to back Alba on the regional list instead, the 46 seats won by unionist parties would have been cut to 24. The SNP would have sacrificed just 2 single seats, and in return, the second largest party would have been the pro-independence Alba Party with 30 seats. It would have been an independence supermajority in the Scottish Parliament. In 2026, don't waste your vote. Vote Alba on the regional list.